Welcome to In Conversation with Manwar Khan podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Do Not Be a Bystander campaign. You can join us in raising awareness about bullying by visiting donotbeabystander.com, and be sure to subscribe to the channel to stay informed about upcoming episodes. Today's guest is Elder Taz.
Welcome to our In Conversation with Manwar Khan podcast. I'm your host, Manwar Khan. People in Canada celebrate National Indigenous History Month every June and recognize National Indigenous People Day on June 21st. These are great opportunities to acknowledge Indigenous people, to learn about their histories, cultures, and ways of lives. Today, on June 21st, our podcast, In Conversation with Manwar Khan, is featuring a remarkable guest, Elder Taz. Elder Taz is widely recognized and respected within her community for her social work. She has made significant contributions to the improvement of Indigenous services within various government institutions, as well as providing invaluable spiritual support to countless inmates in prisons. Elder Taz's wisdom and knowledge are shared through various mediums, including storytelling, songs, and commitment to truth. By recounting the past, she, uh, she unveils the profound impact of discrimination and hatred on generations of Indigenous individuals. Her ultimate aspiration is to foster understanding through education and cultivate a relationship of respect between all inhabitants of this land. Welcome, Elder Taj. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Manwar. I certainly do appreciate your invitation to share a little bit about who I am and the culture today. Seeing it's June 21st that we're doing this, it actually is National Indigenous Day across the land, and different people are celebrating and different people are mourning and grieving at this time. So there's a duality, a mixture of emotions going on across the land.
Thank you. All right, so let's. I would like to ask you a couple of questions, Elder Taz. The first question would be: could you tell us a bit about yourself? I I summarize what I know about you. There are lots of information on the internet too about you. So, but I want you to tell us, my viewers, that about a little bit about yourself and why you think it is important for people to learn about Indigenous culture.
My name is Taz, right? My original name is Audrey. That's the colonial name that was given to me at birth. I come from a small northern community in Alberta, and my mother barely spoke a word of English. I'm the 19th child in my family, and we used our first, we did not live on a reservation, and my mother and grandmother, we say Nukum, my grandmother in my language, Nihiok, did not attend residential school, were not influenced by the European culture. So the teachings that I give are based on our matriarchal lineage. And so when people speak to me, they're a little bit shocked to surprised that I'm very outspoken and that I'm not only educated in the Western philosophies, but I'm also educated in our own spiritual practices and our own customs and tribal affiliations. So I bring a lot to the table when I'm invited to speak at different places, and I try to keep focused on what it is that people need to learn at that time. I know, Manwar, that you focus very much on the bullying and discrimination of people, and I applaud all the efforts you've made towards increasing the awareness of how horrific that is for human beings to experience. And when I think about my culture and all that's happened to the Indigenous people across the land, although many are celebrating today, I tell people, I've been saying all across all social mediums today, that people need to be aware that the celebration is that we survived a genocide. And when I think of the word genocide, that word is based on discrimination and racism and hatred of a particular group of people or particular nationality or race or lifestyle. So, it's unacceptable in my culture originally for people to be looked upon in that way or to be judged. As my mother used to say, I am not God, I'm not creator, she'd say in my language. So it's not up to me to judge, not up to me to say who should do what and who should be whatever way. And so her being the one not being hidden in the bush, there were many that were hidden in the bush, and I'm so grateful my mother was one of them. She was hidden so far in the bush that the Indian agents couldn't find her. So when I share about why Indigenous culture is so important to me, it's because I was raised with it. And it gave me a grounding in who I am as a human being, as a Nehialasquil on this land, and gave me a sense of belonging to this land. It also gave me the language, the culture, the customs, the traditions, and I was the one chosen in the family to be the one to pass it on to the next generations. And so that to me was a gift. And so I take that honor very seriously. And so my life purpose has been to re-educate people back to who they are, especially my people, back to who they are, because so many things have happened in regards to residential schools, foster care, assimilation policy, all these things that have eroded our culture, eroded our languages, and destroyed the people in so many ways. So for me, it's very important that the culture be brought back to life and maintained. And it's been a struggle, Manwar. It's really been a struggle because so many people don't know the language. So many people don't know the customs. So many people don't know, I'm talking about my people, but even non-Indigenous people do not understand what took place on this land, throughout the time that the colonial people came, and how they viewed us as being less than, and how we needed to be integrated into a mainstream society, the European society. So
Right.
that's why it's so meaningful for me to share these things, to educate people, because I'm very aware that people who come from different lands do not have any understanding and do not have any knowledge of what has happened here. Canada is, perceived as being the ultimate place to live, and people come here to escape atrocities such as genocide and being murdered or wherever, discriminated against in other countries, wars and whatnot. Like presently we have the Ukraine's coming, because they're hated by another group of people, and that's war. And that's really sad. And Canada's their safe refuge. And I tell people when I'm educating them, well, the Indigenous people of this land do not have a place to go to. We don't have that safe refuge. And we've been managing to survive all kinds of atrocities that have been taking place on this land, our land.
Right. So I have a question. I'm just curious, Elder Taz. I came from a different country 23 years ago. You do not expect me to know about your culture, about this culture, right? But how do you think we can know?
Well, when I was attending public school here in Edmonton when I was a child, I had to take the French language, learn how to speak that. It took 8 years. I actually blocked that out of my head. I can understand it. I can't speak it. And then English, of course, I had to speak that language to attend school. My first language is Nehio. And a lot of people don't know that. That's the primary language of this area initially, right? And so I really do think that there needs to be more education, starting in a lower grade, and helping people to understand that, we have always been here. This is not new. We are not new, and we are not history. We are still here, and we are still practicing our culture. Many of us, and many of us are coming back into the culture, and we're welcoming them home to who they are. So I think about that, and then I think about people who come from different lands. I really think they need to be educated prior to obtaining a residence here and understanding the Indigenous people of this land, because I've gone into people's homes who are immigrants from another land. I've been invited into their homes, and there's been 30 people sitting in the living room, dining room, and I'm educating them about the history of our people here on this land, and they're shocked. They're absolutely shocked that this took place in this land, and many of them, cry. Some of them will cry in empathy, and I says, I'm not here to have people feel sorry for us. That's not the goal at all. When we talk about history, I says I give a comparison to the Jews when they talk about, when the Germans were killing them off in the genocide, lack of word, better word to use, right? They freely speak about what took place because it's the truth. It's the true history of what took place. And in the past, people have had to try to soft foot what took place with us here in the land. And I says, why are we doing this? It's the truth. It's a true history, and we shouldn't be participating in soft-footing it because we are living that experience in the intergenerational trauma. We are still living the outfall of that, what took place within residential schools, what continues to take place with child welfare. We call that legal kidnapping. What continues to take place with people with addictions. We say that's the rainfall of genocide and trauma. When you see an Indigenous person on the streets, I tell people, please have some compassion. That's one of our really, truly golden spiritual values is compassion. And I ask people, when you look at that person on the street and he or she is Indigenous, understand they are hurting themselves instead of hurting you. We say hurt people. And, but it doesn't, we don't promote discrimination. We don't promote for people to attack people. We don't promote blaming white folks per se. We say stick to the policies, stick to the law. What happened with the laws in this land that created this? And of course, people had different values when they came here. They wanted the land, so they had to do things to ensure that they got the land, and they viewed us as being less than. In Canada, we don't have a class system. I know in other countries there is a class system. In this country, there should not be a class system. And with our Indigenous communities, we say everyone belongs in the circle of life. No one is above, no one is below. And, we look at, say you're a janitor, we look at that as just as important as being working as an MLA in government. We don't see any difference, and we don't treat that person any different. So it was difficult to understand why people would come to this land and view us as being less than, because we spoke a different language, we dressed differently, we had different values, and we aspired to keep the land clean and the water clean. Our spiritual practices are very closely related to how we work on the land and how we take care of the water and the air. And we always give thanks to, the great ball of fire up top, the sun, the grandfather sun, as we call him. And so we try to get people to understand we are our own people. And it's difficult when we're in a world where we're bombarded by the colonial values of life. People who've come from Europe who think that money is the ultimate God. We don't believe in that. We believe that helping and sharing and caring with people is a valuable ways of thinking and ways of being. And we try to help our fellow man. If somebody's hungry, we feed them. We don't judge them. And if somebody is thirsty, we'll give them a drink without question. We try to ease the pain and suffering of other people. That is our goal as individuals, as Native people, as Indigenous people across the land. That's how we were. That's how many of us still are. And the connection to spirit is really strong, despite the atrocities that took place within residential schools, despite the assimilation policy that wanted to assimilate us into a different culture. We managed to maintain an awful lot of our own way of being.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So my next question is, in what ways do you know that indigenous people have experienced bullying or discrimination, in
Um,
your opinion?
in my opinion, well, it's not even my opinion, Manuel, it's actually fact. You know, in 1831, they opened up the first residential school in Canada. And it was, and they had, oh gee whiz, how many of them across the land from East Coast to West Coast? They had various residential schools. And they had over 10,000 children, they estimated at the time, but I suspect the numbers were way higher than that because we're finding discrepancies in the recordings that they have taken, that they have kept. And when we talk about what is influenced, that is that uh, they wanted to change the Indian child into a non-Indian child. They wanted to change what an Indian child was. So when they took the children, they made a law. They passed a law called the assimilation policy, and people can Google that. It's called the assimilation policy, and that was in 1831, I believe, that they made that law. And in that, they were able to enforce that law with the RCMP that they created that time to remove children from the home. People think that the parents willingly sent their children for education. That is not the case at all. The children were removed and placed within residential schools where they were like, how would you put it, like big boarding rooms where they slept next to each other in little beds, and they were regimented from morning till night. These residential schools were primarily run by Catholic Church, 70% United Church, and Anglican churches. So as Christian people working with the government to do their best to assimilate the Indigenous population, using the children starting at the age of some as young as 3 years old and going up to 15, 16 years old. They would keep the children 8, 9, 10 years. Some of them not being able to go home and visit their parents, some of them not able to go and see their relatives. Even in the residential schools, they were not allowed to talk to their brothers or sisters who were in the same building. The atrocities that took place, the discrimination, the hatred by some of what I know of the stories of nuns and priests was that the children were beaten for speaking the language. The first thing they did was cut off the braid, which is very sacred to us, our hair. And so, and then I know with my own father, I had a dad who was in residential school. My sister, my brother, my auntie, two of my sisters, actually my sister-in-law, they were all in residential schools, and they couldn't talk too much about it. It was too hard. They all suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder because of it. Anytime that they would talk about it, my dad literally, and he was a very strong man, he would literally start shaking. His body would start trembling, and I'd say, it's okay, you don't have to talk about it. We know bad things happened in there. And it was just because they were Native children, they were Indigenous children. And their first language would have been the original language of their family. For me, it's Nihil. So they would have gone in and spoke Nihilin. And if they spoke the language, they got actually punched in the face or strung up, punished in all kinds of different ways. They were starved in these places. They heard many, many stories of people, the children watching the nuns and priests and the ministers eating fabulous meals while they ate porridge with worms in them. So the atrocities, the hatred, the discrimination went on daily for these children. And so the outfall of that is when they returned back to their communities, they brought back some of that horrific behaviors. And it affected their parenting styles. It affected their social skills. It affected their ability to take care of themselves. They were not taught to take care of themselves. They were taught to adhere to whatever the administrators wanted them to do at that time. So there's so many stories, Manuel, so many stories. And people can just Google residential schools of Canada, and they will read so many facts. These are facts and truths about what took place in this land. The hatred continues today. There's times where I've gone somewhere myself, and I'm brown, visibly native. I've been mistaken for Spanish and other things too, but the discrimination is there. The hatred is there. People will talk down to me. People will think that I don't understand English. People will think that I don't know how to speak, and it's really sad because I'm an intelligent woman, right? And I can recall, and I can say this very clearly, when I worked for the Alberta government doing as the elder at the institution, I was asked to go into a board meeting, and the person who came in, who was in charge, asked if I could speak English. And I was just appalled. I was just like, what? I said, I can speak English very well. Thank you very much. Because he was talking, and in our way of understanding thing is we don't interrupt. It's rude to interrupt. So we wait for the person to finish talking before we share what we're saying, what we think or what we want to respond. So he kept on talking and talking, and finally he turned around and says, does she not speak English? Couldn't you have brought an elder who speaks English? And I realized he thought I didn't speak. I said, I speak English just fine. Everybody's faces sort of dropped like, and that's a stereotype, right? And stereotyping is discrimination, right? And then everybody expects me to walk around with feathers in my hair and different things. And I tell people, that's discrimination. You're stereotyping me. Don't do that. Get to know me as a human being. Get to know my culture and what I believe in, and you'll get to know awful lot about the Indigenous community. It's not just this way. We're not all powwow dancers, although I do dance powwow. We're not all powwow dancers. That's not the only part of our culture. We were a very wide society. We had tradespeople. We had people who knew how to make canoes, who knew how to build things. We had people who who were the spiritual leaders, the medicine people we have. We still have medicine people. We still have people who are the hunters, the gatherers. We have, who have their different roles in the community. And so I tell people, you're seeing the powwow, and if you think that's all we are, you're sadly mistaken. Then again, you're stereotyping us. That is discrimination. So it's educating people to understand what is discrimination. And discrimination will lead to hatred if people don't like what they see, if it doesn't agree with their values, then hatred comes into play and people get hurt, right?
Yep, exactly. Thank you. The next question is, what beliefs have you encountered regarding Indigenous people of Canada?
Well, some of the beliefs I don't drink alcohol, and I don't smoke cigarettes, and I don't do drugs, and I've never been a prostitute. And so it really surprises me that some people think one of those things have been part of my life. And I look at them and go, no, it's not been a part of my life. And right now I live with a bile disorder which affects my liver. So when I tell people, I have cirrhosis of the liver because of a bile disorder, they immediately think it's an alcohol problem. And I go, no, it's a hereditary disease that I inherited from one of my parents. So it's affected my liver. And I says, no, I've never been an alcoholic. I've never been a drug addict. I've never been a prostitute. And that's assumptions, and those are myths. I says, yes, you may see an awful lot of our people out there who are addicted to some kind of substance and doing self-harm. But there's many of us who have worked all our lives, who have jobs, who have homes, who bought homes. I bought my first home in Stony Plain when I was 17. And I tell people I worked in the city of Edmonton starting at the age of 13. I lied about my age. I said I was 16. They didn't ask for documentation back then. And so I says, people think that we're lazy. They think that all we do is just laze around and collect welfare. And I said, that is so not true. We're probably really most hardest workers you'll ever meet. You just haven't seen what we do. My dad was a fisherman, trapper. I says, if you've ever gone into the bush and trapped, I says, in the middle of winter, 40 below weather, I said, you'd understand what hard work is. My mother, I says, if you had met her when she was 70 and you tried to have a contest with her chopping wood, you would quickly lose. I said, you would find out a 7-year-old Nahil Squill woman is really quick and fast at chopping wood. I said, that's not easy work. I says, so to provide wood for the winter. I said, so when you think about people, our people, and you're classifying them as lazy and drunks and no good who don't want to work and always looking for the government handout, you're discriminating. That's hatred. And it needs to stop, because we are not that way at all. And those who are suffering because of trauma that's been put upon them by other people, and who are doing self-harm, they need compassion and help and support. They don't need judgment and being put down.
Yeah, thank you. My last question for you is, if you could wave a magic wand and achieve your greatest dream, what would be that vision look like?
It would be everything I've been working towards all my life. A world where people don't judge, people don't hate, and people don't hurt one another. Children are protected, elders are protected, and people are respectful and loving and kind, and people work together. If I could just wave a magic wand and make all the hurt go away that causes hurt people to hurt people, I would do that. And if I could get people to understand a human being is just part of the circle. We are just a small part of a bigger circle of life. That everything that we see and experience on this earth is a spiritual journey. And I would wish that every spirit being that walks on this earth would wake up to the fact that you're just here for a short time. And you're accountable and you are responsible for all that you do. And we all need to understand what respect means. People have a real confusion when it comes to the word love. So I've gone back to the words respect. It has boundaries. And that boundaries is don't hurt. Don't hurt. Don't pass on the pain. Deal with it. If I could make that magic wand, then people who are hurting would not be hurt. And they wouldn't pass on that pain.
Thank you, Elder Taz. We have come to the end of the podcast. I'd like to thank today's guest, Elder Taz, for taking out time for us from her busy schedule. I know how busy your schedule is. I really appreciate you being here at our podcast today. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Before we wrap up, I would like to remind our listeners that there are several resources available to help individuals dealing with bullying and discrimination. The Government of Alberta has a bullying helpline which provides support and advice to those experiencing bullying. And the helpline can be reached at 1-888-456-2323. Bullying is a violation of human rights. Under no circumstances is bullying acceptable. As a community, we have a shared responsibility to stand against bullying and refuse to be a bystander. Thank you for joining in conversation with Manwar Khan, and we will see you next week.